8 scaring and interesting real historical facts very hard to believe. 1. In the Middle Ages, some conflicts between husband and wife were resolved by a duel. Domestic violence is a severe problem. In the Middle Ages, they found a very original way to resolve disputes between spouses, not to prohibit them, but to legitimize them. So, the book of 1467 by the duelist Hans Talhofer called Fechtbuch, Fencing Manual, describes the rules for conducting court fights between spouses. A man sitting waist deep in an earthen pit was armed with a club. His wife was given a bag with a stone weighing 4 or 5 pounds, 1.5 to 2 kilograms. Any techniques were allowed. The judge determined the winner. 2. 60 nobles of the Holy Roman Empire drowned in feces in Erfurt. Once, 2 powerful gentlemen, Louis III, Landgrave of Thuringia, and Conrad of Wittelsbach, Archbishop of Mainz, quarreled. Some tension had long been felt between Thuringia and Mainz, and the archbishop decided to build a castle on the border with a potential enemy in Heiligenberg just in case. The Landgrave said that this was a provocation and decent archbishops do not act like this, and therefore now he is obliged to organize an invasion of Mainz. Emperor Henry VI, passing by on business, he wanted to make war with Poland, nothing special, decided to help the gentlemen reconcile. To do this, he organized a diet, that is, a meeting of important people, in the city of Erfurt. If Louis, Conrad, and Heinrich met face to face, there would be nothing to talk about. But in the Middle Ages, things were not done like that, so everyone entered the negotiations with a considerable entourage. In addition, they were joined by a nobility from all over the Holy Roman Empire, some on a serious occasion, some counting on a banquet. In summary, on July 25, 1184, more than 100 people gathered for negotiations in St. Peter's Cathedral in Erfurt. And when the meeting began, the wooden floor beneath them, not designed for such weight and rotted, collapsed. Monsignors fell, broke through the next floor with their bodies, and finally collapsed into a giant septic tank under the monastery. A septic tank that has not been cleaned for many years. As a result, more than 60 people died, some from injuries during a fall, others drowned in tons of excrement. Among the dead were such respected gentlemen as Gosmer III, the Counts of Ziegenhain, Beringer I von Meldingen, and Friedrich of Abenberg, and other important people. As you can see, not only in the Game of Thrones, nobles have a hard time. Louis III floundered in the septic tank, but they pulled him out. The archbishop also survived by sitting next to the window. And King Henry, at that time, retired to a niche toilet with a stone floor. In those days, such places in castles were delicately called wardrobes. He had to wait, sitting in the lavatory, while the servants brought a ladder and removed him from the second floor of the collapsed building. After that, His Majesty became disillusioned with diplomacy and left Erfurt. 3. Pope Formosus was put on trial after being exhumed. In January 897, Pope Stephen VI accused his predecessor, Formosa, of heresy. This was the most popular way in Rome to remove an objectionable hierarchy, to call him a heretic and anathematize him. Something like a cancellation culture, only for popes. The fact is that Formosus anointed the wrong person to reign the Holy Roman Empire, Arnulf of Carinthia, from the Carolingians. After the short-lived Emperor Arnulf was paralyzed, another king, Lambert of Spoleto, began to claim the title. Formosa's decision urgently needed to be cancelled in court, pretending that this was not the Pope but a traitor to the Church. And it doesn't matter who he anointed there. There was, however, one snag. Formos died safely 9 months before the start of the meeting, so he could not come to court, which is reasonably expected. But the fact of the defendant's death did not stop the justice machine. The orderly decomposed corpse was pulled out of the tomb, dragged through the streets, taken to the Lateran Basilica, dressed in papal clothes, and put on the throne. Pope Stephen accused the corpse of perjury, violation of canon law, and misappropriation of the title of bishop and began the interrogation. Naturally, it was not Formose himself who answered, but a deacon hiding behind the back of the throne, imitating the voice of the deceased. As a result of the meeting, the corpse was found guilty. All his decisions, including the anointing of Arnulf, were declared null and void. 3 fingers were cut off, which he used for blessings during his lifetime. His papal vestments were torn off and buried in a cemetery for the mob. The adventures of Formosa did not end there. He was exhumed again, apparently by grave diggers who hoped to profit from something. But since the excommunicated pope was buried without honors, the robbers did not find anything of value, tied a load to the corpse, and threw it into the Tiber River. The late ex-pope surfaced, fishermen found him, and, according to the historian Liutprand of Cremona, brought him to the church of the Blessed Prince of the Apostles Peter. There, the remains of Formosa are rumored to have begun to work miraculous cures. In addition, they recalled that during the Corpse Synod an earthquake damaged the Lateran Temple, which further convinced the mob of the holiness of Formosa. A little later, the new pope, John IX, restored Formosa in his rights, buried him in the papal tomb with honors, and forbade him to continue to carry out a trial of the dead. And sometime later, the next pope, Sergius III, canceled this decision and again declared Formosa a heretic and ordered him to leave an inscription on the grave of Stephen VI, what a fine fellow that Formosa exposed. For the third time, they decided not to exhume the poor fellow, and he remained to rest in St. Peter's Basilica. 4. Indian Galvarino fought with the Spaniards without hands. When the Spanish conquistadors conquered South America, they faced fierce resistance from the Mapuche Indians or Araucanas. Nearly 150 Mapuche were captured after a fierce battle in Araucania in 1557. Most of the prisoners were ordered by the governor of Chile, Garcia Hurtado de Mendoza, to cut off their right hand and nose. And the most ferocious warrior named Galvarino was cut off both hands at once. He was excellent in battle. If you think that losing limbs stopped Galvarino, then you are mistaken. He attached a pair of knives to his stumps and continued to fight the Spaniards. Galvarino, even without hands, laid down a mountain of conquistadors at the Battle of Milarapu. In the end, the Spaniards nevertheless prevailed, killed almost 3,000 Mapuche, and fed Galvarino alive to the dogs. 5. The Romans used urine for washing and brushing their teeth. The Romans were generally exciting guys. For example, they were very ingenious in their use of urine. Since it contains a lot of ammonia, which has bleaching properties, it was used as a laundry detergent. Specially trained people called fullo worked in laundries. They dipped worn togas into vats of settled urine and then trampled them underfoot. They were then washed in water with ashes or clay. This made it possible to clean the fabric of fat. Human urine was also used in tanning leather, treating sheep by pouring urine into their throats, and, according to the Roman historian Columella, was used as fertilizer for growing pomegranates. Urine was so essential to the Roman economy that Emperor Vespasian taxed the public latrines that sold it. To his son Titus, when asked if his father had gone crazy, he reasonably answered, "Money doesn't smell." And for dessert, here is the most original use of urine among the Romans. They rinsed their mouths with it to make their teeth whiter. Interestingly, it even makes some sense thanks again to ammonia. Fortunately, not everyone, apparently, made such sacrifices, but only the most desperate snobs who valued a snow-white smile. For example, the historian Catullus ironically mentions one such original named Ignatius. 6. The Roman Empire was auctioned. By the way, one more thing about the Romans. There was one unpleasant period in the history of Rome, the year 193, during which 5 emperors were replaced on the throne. Emperor Commodus, the same one played by Joaquin Phoenix in Gladiator, was, in reality, an extraordinary guy. He loved to fight in the arena against real fighters, but he often scored on the empire's affairs. And besides, he suffered from paranoia and liked to kill his consuls just in case. Otherwise, they would suddenly think of something. Unsurprisingly, those close to him decided to eliminate him and appoint a better ruler carefully. It didn't work out right. An attempt to poison Commodus failed because the emperor vomited. His personal Greco-Roman wrestling coach, Narcissus, had to be hastily bribed to strangle Commodus while taking a bath together. The fighter coped with the task, and one of the conspirators, Pertinax, was appointed the new Caesar. He, in principle, was a good person and could become a pretty decent emperor because he abolished the draconian taxes of Commodus and gave more freedom to Roman citizens. But he did not bring money to the Praetorian guards, and they were offended by him. The guards guarding the emperor were accustomed to receiving from each new applicant a certain amount as a gift, called donative or donatvium. Praetorians are not bloggers for you. The reluctance to donate to them led to unpleasant consequences. Therefore, the Praetorians took and killed Pertinax and then announced an auction. Lot was the throne of Caesar and the whole Roman Empire to boot. The wealthy senator Didius Julian offered the highest price, 25,000 sesterces for a Praetorian, and he was declared the new Caesar. He ruled for only 2 months because he did not manage to pay off the Praetorians in time and did not guess to take a loan. On the 66th day of his reign, the guards, who did not receive payment, killed the debtor. Only the next emperor, Lucius Septimius Severus, was able to restore order in Rome. He became a good ruler and enjoyed the support of ordinary Romans. And he was not stupid, because the first thing he did when he became Caesar was to dissolve the Praetorian Guard, replacing it with his own soldiers. 7. Britain and the US went to war over the killing of a pig. In 1846, Britain and the United States divided the territory on the North American continent and signed the Oregon Treaty, which stipulated their borders west of the Rocky Mountains. The problem is that geography was then SOSO, since Google Maps and mapping satellites had yet to be invented. So the contract turned out to be somewhat vague. There were no difficulties with the division of borders on land, but on the water. In general, the two powers could not divide the tiny island of San Juan, and both declared it their territory, and forgot about its existence for 13 years. On one half of the island, the British Hudson's Bay Company established a sheep farm. On the other, American settlers grew potatoes. For a long time, they lived in peace until one unfortunate incident occurred. One day, an American farmer named Lyman Catlar got up in the morning, went out into the street, and found that a giant black pig was ruining his garden and eating potatoes. Since this wasn't the first time this had happened, Catlar freaked out, took his rifle, and killed the pig on the spot without a warning shot. Then, like a decent man, he went to the owner of the pig, the Irishman Charles Griffin, who ran the sheep farm, who told him what had happened and offered $10 in compensation. Griffin apparently loved the pig very much, because he got angry and demanded at least $100. Catlar refused to pay because it was the pig that invaded his territory. And when the British authorities threatened to arrest Catlar in those tumultuous times, people often forgot about such a thing as a jurisdiction. He went for protection to the brave American warriors. Brigadier General William Harney, the commander of the Oregon Military District, took the message that American citizens were being offended, and he sent 66 soldiers of the 9th Infantry Regiment under the command of Captain George Pickett to protect the farmer. Seeing that a real military detachment had arrived on the island, the British also decided not to waste time on trifles and requested support in the form of 3 warships with Marines. The conflict escalated, and on August 10, 1859, on San Juan Island, 461 American soldiers with 14 guns prepared to take on 5 British warships with 167 guns and 2,140 men aboard. Fortunately, the Army commanders, American Colonel Silas Casey and British Rear Admiral Robert Baines, who learned what the fuss was about, decided that starting a war over a pig was stupid. Therefore, both ordered their men on no account to shoot first. For several days, American and British soldiers, sitting in positions, shouted all sorts of offensive things to each other, trying to provoke the enemy into aggression to get the right to bypass the order and use weapons. But not a single shot was fired. Upon learning of what had happened, high officials in Washington and London were horrified by the prospect of war over such a trifling matter and began negotiations. But then, inopportunely, the American Civil War began, and the negotiations dragged on for 12 years. All this time, American and British garrisons of 100 people held their half of the island of San Juan. The British left the island only in 1872, the Americans withdrew their troops in 1874. Thus ended the many years of Anglo-American confrontation on San Juan Island, the only casualty of which was a pig. 8. Canada and Denmark are still fighting over Hans Island. However, sometimes countries manage to conduct conflicts more peacefully. For example, Canada and Denmark cannot share the tiny island of Hans, which you can see above. Therefore, the so-called intellectual war is being waged on the island. Once every few months, the naval forces of Canada arrive there, plant the flag of their state on the island, absorb the stock of solid drinks left by the enemy in advance, celebrate the island's capture, and depart with victory. After some time, the Danes' military land on the island, set their flag, use the booze left by the Canadians, declare the island theirs, and sail away. This conflict has been going on since 1984 to this day. Danish sailors traditionally leave schnapps on the island, and Canadian sailors leave whiskey. The world would be much more fun if all wars were fought like this. Top 3 interesting historical facts. History is full of secrets, mysteries, and incredible events that are hard to believe in for a person of the 21st century. And there are those that are especially difficult to believe because of the scale and savagery of such events. It is about such historical facts that we are talking about in today's video. Top F. Before the video starts, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notification to catch all new releases. Grab your popcorn, we start. Extermination of cats in the Middle Ages. In different eras and different countries, the attitude towards cats varied. Everyone knows that cats were very fond of the inhabitants of ancient Egypt. The cat was also considered a sacred animal by the Vikings, as the Scandinavians believed that it was associated with the Freya, goddess of love and fertility. In the Edda Minor, a collection of ancient Scandinavian poems, Freya traveled on a team pulled by two cats. But in medieval Europe, cats, especially black ones, were considered companions of witches. These views became especially relevant in connection with the struggle of the Catholic Church against the remnants of paganism, including the Scandinavian cults that still existed in Europe. In particular, this struggle fell on the shoulders of the church courts, the forerunners of the Inquisition. Their appearance, as well as severe punishments for religious crimes, up to burning, go very deep into history. This was connected not only with the desire to deal with the echoes of paganism, but also with the crisis of the church caused by the emergence of numerous heresies, alternative religious teachings. Cathars, Waldensians, and Albigensians openly opposed the popes and considered the Catholic Church sinful and unnecessary. In this situation, by the 12th century, the opinion was strengthened that black cats are associated with Satan and demons. Perhaps the negative attitude towards cats was also associated with the misogyny of the Catholic Church. According to church hierarchies, women were responsible for original sin. They were associated with prudent and fickle cats, while men were associated with loyal dogs. This era of great superstition culminated in the 12th and 13th centuries. The heretics turned into accomplices of the devil, and they were accused of all mortal sins. Confessions from people detained for witchcraft were beaten out by torture. In particular, at that time, the Bishop of Hildesheim, Conrad, allegedly uncovered a satanic cult associated with a black cat. He claimed that his members worship the devil at night and arrange orgies, and also contact the other world with the help of a cat statue that comes to life, kissing it under the tail. These testimonies, of course, were obtained with the use of torture and intimidation. Pope Gregory IX responded to Conrad's signal. In 1234, the same year the Papal Inquisition was created, he signed the bull Vox in Rama, Voice in Rama. The name refers to the biblical city of Ramah from the stories about the destruction of Jerusalem and the weeping of Rachel. Bulla authorized the crusade against the freedom-loving inhabitants of Stettingen, a region in the northeast of modern Germany, who allegedly indulged in the Luciferian heresy, forgot, and despised the Catholic faith. The Pope urged to resolutely fight against Satanism and help the Church in every possible way in this matter. Some historians consider Bulla to be the first official document of the Catholic Church in which black cats are mentioned in connection with the witch and demonic rituals. How the Inquisition and witch hunters exterminated cats. Gradually, hatred of cats spread throughout Central and Western Europe, and the papacy continued to look for witches and their associates. So, Innocent VIII, who took the papacy 2.5 centuries after Gregory, wrote that the cat is the favorite animal of the devil and an idol for all witches. In the demonology treatise Malleus Maleficarum, the infamous Hammer of the Witches, first published in 1487, cats are called vessels for impure spirits that tempt people. A cat and a broom were considered the main attributes of sorcerers and witches. The most ardent hunters of evil spirits considered their presence in the house to be sufficient grounds for accusing the owner or mistress of witchcraft. Cats were burned along with such owners, and often in the same bag. However, the animals were killed not only together with the owner's sorcerers, but just like that. The Great Cat Extermination, as the historian Robert Dornton called it, lasted from the 13th to the 17th century. Animals were destroyed in various cruel ways. For example, they were scalded with boiling water or thrown from bell towers. Later, it even became part of some folk holidays. So, the Cat Festival, Kattenstoet, which takes place annually in the Belgian Ypres, is associated with a similar tradition. Today, of course, no one kills or tortures animals at the festival. Plush cats are thrown from the bell tower, and people standing below are trying to catch them. In the 16th century in France, cats were regularly burned just for the amusement of the crowd. The ashes left after the burning was taken home, believing that it brings good luck. This practice was only stopped in 1765. Especially rapidly, these phenomena spread in cities. In rural areas, where cats saved crops from rodents, the animals were not touched. Also, the mass extermination of cats did not follow in those countries where there was no widespread witch hunt, for example, in England. But this does not negate the fact that animals were exterminated in France, Germany, Poland, Spain, Belgium, and Holland. Evidence of irrational hatred of cats can be traced back to the 19th century. For example, the last case of throwing cats from the bell tower in Ypres dates back to 1817. What did it lead to? It is not known for certain how many cats were destroyed in the Middle Ages and how many of them were black. Nevertheless, some researchers believe that the scale of this extermination was very large and the consequences were catastrophic. In particular, the massacre of cats is called one of the causes of European plague epidemics, which swept through the region several times until the 17th century. So, in 1346, a terrible epidemic began, nicknamed the Black Death. The plague raged until 1351 and claimed the lives of 15 to 35 million people, more than 30% of the population of Europe. In unsanitary conditions, cats destroyed rodents that spread the infection. The black rats brought to Europe and the fleas that lived on them posed a particularly great danger. However, there is no direct evidence that the destruction of cats contributed greatly to the spread of the disease. For example, its carriers can be not only fleas, mainly living on the body of animals, but also human lice. At the same time, as shown by computer simulations, the transmission of infection through parasites from person to person is more likely than from rats to people. In addition, the plague is also transmitted by airborne droplets. In any case, the cruelty with which cats were treated in the Middle Ages is completely unacceptable. Fortunately, in our time, animal abuse is much less common and strongly condemned. And many of us cannot even imagine our life without cats. Children's Crusade. The so-called Children's Crusade of 1212 was not much in the truest sense of the word. Rather, it was a spontaneous popular movement, which received its name because a large number of children and adolescents took part in it. Formed in Germany and France, the enthusiasts decided to go to the east, to Jerusalem, to free the Holy Sepulchre, one of the main shrines of the Christian world. However, their undertaking did not end at all as they expected, and it was difficult to call this crowd an army. However, real knights, representatives of the Franciscan order, also joined her, but they, according to historical documents, were not armed. Pilgrims believed that the holiness of children would protect them better than any weapon. Purpose and causes of the Children's Crusade. Shortly before the Crusade of the Children of 1212, the Fourth Crusade, 1202 to 1204, took place, during which European knights intended to recapture Jerusalem, which had again come under Muslim control. But instead, they, having cooperated with the Venetians, sacked Constantinople, and on the ruins of the Byzantine Empire formed a new empire, the Latin. Thus, the goal was not achieved, and soon a popular movement broke out in France and Germany for the liberation of Jerusalem. The desire to go to the Holy Land was expressed by many, so their religious zeal was the reason for the Children's Crusade, which ended so ingloriously. Members of the Children's Crusade. Their exact number is unknown, but, according to available data, the army consisted of about 30,000 children and adolescents, accompanied by representatives of the clergy. They were also joined by the Knights of the Franciscan Order, who were the only participants in the Children's Crusade, representing some kind of force. The rest of the improvised troops consisted simply of a crowd of enthusiastic people and unarmed at that. Then there was an opinion that the holiness and purity of children would not allow anyone to harm them, and, according to some information, even the Franciscan Knights went on a campaign without weapons. The course of events of the Children's Crusade. Since the participants in the Children's Crusade were mainly French and Germans, their crowd went to France through the Italian territories, convinced that the sea would part before them, as it parted before Moses, according to the Bible. In Italy, they faced hostility, since 10 years ago, Crusader knights had already passed through these lands, plundering everything in their path. During the events of the Children's Crusade, many died during the crossing of the Alps. In addition, various criminals joined their army to profit from donations under the guise of pious pilgrims. A significant role in the events of the Children's Crusade was played by the French shepherd Stephen, who had a vision of Jesus, who ordered him to lead the campaign to the Holy Land, and only children, as pure souls people, were to take part in it. Stephen began to preach so convincingly that many children ran away from home to join him. He managed to gather more than 30,000 participants in the French city of Vendôme, from where the pilgrims moved to Marseille, located on the southern coast of France. Arriving at the place, they began to pray that the sea would part before them, since no one thought about the ships for the crossing. The sea, however, did not want to part, and it is not known how it would have ended if it were not for two Marseille merchants, Hugo Farius and Guillaume Porcus. The merchants, taking pity on the pilgrims, put at their disposal 7 ships that were to be transported across the Mediterranean. Each ship was capable of carrying about 700 people, and they probably made many flights to carry everyone. However, an unpleasant surprise awaited them. The people who were brought to Algeria were already waiting for local troops. As it turned out, Farius and Porcus agreed with local slave traders, and thus simply sold all the participants of the Children's Crusade into slavery. Nothing was known about their fate for a long time, until one of the monks, who participated in the pilgrimage and subsequently escaped, told about it 18 years later. Nothing is known about the fate of the treacherous merchants who sold the pilgrims into slavery. Most likely, they hastened to hide after the deed was done. Results of the Children's Crusade. The Children's Crusade did not achieve its goal. There were no results at all. All the pilgrims, that is, about 30,000 people, simply fell into slavery in North Africa, and their further fate is unknown. The tasks set, such as the liberation of Jerusalem and the Holy Sepulchre, were also not achieved. But subsequently, the events of the Children's Crusade formed the basis of many works of art and music. It was the only such popular movement in history. However, despite the abundance of chronicle sources dedicated to him and reliably confirmed details, very little is known about him. But one of the results of the Children's Crusade was a rise in enthusiasm among Christians, and interest in full-fledged crusades began to revive. Wives' sale in England. In the 17th century in Great Britain, one could see such a picture. Fair, merchants vying to praise their goods, shouting over each other. And across the square, a man leads a woman on a leash. They are both poorly dressed, sad, and trying not to look at each other. The husband is selling his wife. Whether the need pushed them to this or the extreme degree of disgust for each other is unknown. But this picture from those days did not surprise anyone. Marriages of that time. Until 1753, common law marriage dominated in England. A man and a woman lived together, ran a household, and raised children, but they did not have any legal obligations in relation to each other. Everything was changed by the law on marriages, adopted in 1753. It was the first legislative act regulating the position of spouses. After that, only unions concluded by the Anglican Church began to be recognized in England. Husband and wife became, from the point of view of legislation, inseparable. More precisely, the personality of the wife was completely absorbed by the husband. The English judge Sir William Blackstone wrote in the same year that the very being or legal existence of a woman is suspended during the period of marriage, or at least it is united and included in her husband, under whose wing, protection, and cover she does everything. Married ladies could not own property, and they were the property of their husbands. This was thought to be for her own good. After all, a woman is not able to make decisions and be responsible for her actions. So great a favorite is the female sex of the laws of England. Blackstone noted. Divorce. At first, breaking up a marriage was relatively simple. It was enough to file a church court for the separation of bed and table. The reason could be very cruel treatment or treason. However, it was forbidden to marry and remarry a second time. But after 1690, the procedure became much more complicated. To break off marital relations, it was necessary to apply to Parliament, and it was long and expensive. Even though special divorce courts were created in 1857 to make divorce easier, divorce was still a luxury for the poor. There were alternatives: leaving, escaping, or selling one's wife. The last method was by no means the most popular, besides illegal, but still quite effective. The Laws of Respect for Women in Considering Their Natural Rights, 1777, noted that for the poor, the sale of a wife was seen as a way of dissolving a marriage. For many women, selling was the only way to end an unsatisfactory marriage. Deal features. It is still unknown when exactly this custom began, presumably at the end of the 17th century, but the practice became stronger by the middle of the 18th century, and the last cases were recorded at the beginning of the 20th century. Some reports indicate that the sale was known in advance. For example, an enterprising husband advertised in a local newspaper. As a rule, there was no fixed cost for the wife. Everything was decided in the order of the auction. The husband led his wife to the market with a rope tied around her neck. It happened that the buyer was known in advance. In September 1815, at Staines Market, only 3 shillings and 4 pence were offered per lot. No one dared to fight the applicant for a blonde object whose merits could only be appreciated by those who knew them. This buyer could boast of a long and intimate acquaintance. Despite all the wildness of these bargains, the wife could influence the deal. If she did not like the future master and sovereign, she could veto the contract. An 1824 report from Manchester testifies that after several auctions, the wife was brought down to 5 shillings, but she did not like the buyer and was put up again for 3 shillings and a quart of ale. In March 1766, a Southwark carpenter sold his wife in a fit of marital indifference in an alehouse. Having sobered up, the man asked her to return and, after she refused, hanged himself. In some cases, the women already knew to whom they would be sold and even gave their lovers the money to buy them. But in Scotland, the cynical custom did not take root. Scots turned out to be from a different test. There was only one case recorded.
On July 16, 1828, the husband put his wife Mary McIntosh on the grass market in Edinburgh, which caused a real mass brawl.
This case is described in the book Scotland. Autobiography edited by Rosemary Goring. The women of the district, numbering about 700, gathered and armed with stones, some even throwing them, while others wrapped the stones in stockings and handkerchiefs, rushed to attack the crowd, striking at all who tucked underhand. Finally reaching the auctioneer, they tore and scratched his face most terribly as a result of the insult inflicted on the fair sex. In the 18th century, this custom, along with the British, sailed to the United States. The wind of change. But not everyone was happy with this state of affairs. Here is what the Times newspaper writes for 1797. On Friday, a butcher put his wife up for sale in Smithfield Market, near the Ram Inn, with a leash around her neck and a rope around her waist, by which she was tied to a fence, and one cabman became the happy buyer who gave her husband 3 guineas and a crown for his former wife. It is a pity that there is no government for such depraved behavior of the lower classes. Disillusioned with the laws and realizing the futility of their attempts to call their husbands to order, some brave women stood up for the rights of their girlfriends. In 1756, in Dublin, a group of women rescued a wife, after which the husband was put on trial and placed in a corral with cattle until early the next morning. In about 1777, the sale of a wife in Carmarthenshire caused a great silence in the crowd and a sense of unease in the assembly. This practice, although condemned, rarely led to criminal prosecution. An 1853 legal handbook ordered English judges to do away with the myth of wife selling. It is a widespread mistake that a husband can get rid of his wife by selling her on the open market with a noose around her neck. Such actions on his part should be severely punished by the local judge. Finally, by the middle of the 19th century, the voices of the dissatisfied became louder. The last case of a wife being sold was in 1913 when a woman testified in a Leeds police court that her husband had sold her to one of his comrades for £1. 5 famous historical events that may be falsified plus reliable proofs. History is an inexact science, especially when it comes to eras far removed from modernity. Sometimes scientists do not have reliable sources to judge some events. Sometimes, on the contrary, there are enough sources, but they contradict each other. And sometimes discoveries of researchers radically change ideas about the past. 1. Homer wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey. Little is known about the alleged author of Europe's oldest poems. So much so that scholars doubt not only that Homer made up the stories of the Trojan War and the Odyssey, but that he even existed. Neither the exact place nor the time of Homer's birth and death is known. For example, Herodotus wrote that the narrator lived not earlier than 400 years before me, that is, in the 9th to 8th centuries BC. But other sources, an unnamed Greek historian and pseudo-Plutarch, indicate that he was born much earlier. The first writes that this happened in the 11th and the second that in the 13th to 12th centuries BC, during the Trojan War. In general, even if Homer really existed, then in the descriptions of his descendants he turned into a semi-mythical character, a wise blind man. The Iliad and the Odyssey also say little about Homer. The fact is that they were passed from mouth to mouth for a long time and were written down no earlier than the 8th century BC. As early as the 18th century, notes by ancient scholars with other versions of ancient poems were found on the manuscripts of poems. That is, each new narrator performed the texts in his own way. Perhaps that is why the style of the Iliad and the Odyssey is different. Some researchers even believe that they were composed of different people and, perhaps, at different times. 2. The Library of Alexandria was destroyed in a fire. This library, located in the Egyptian city of Alexandria, was the largest in history. It contained from 40 to 700,000 scrolls. In the 3rd century BC, it was founded by the Ptolemies, a dynasty of rulers who remained in these lands after the campaigns of Alexander the Great. However, the library did not survive even in the Middle Ages. The debate about why this happened is still going on. One view is that the library was destroyed by fire. Various authors, from Plutarch to Edward Gibbon, an 18th century historian, blamed Roman emperors, Muslims, and Christians for what happened. The latter, for example, burns the library in the 2009 film Agora. That's just not a single trace of a major fire the researchers could not find. So, according to Plutarch, the legionnaires of Caesar, who found himself under siege in Alexandria, set fire to ships in the port to prevent the enemy fleet from reaching the city. As a result, the fire spread to the library. However, today's scientists believe that it is unlikely that the book depository was really badly damaged during the fire. Most likely, everything happened by itself. After the Roman conquest of Egypt, the importance of Alexandria and its library began to decline. Scholars and scribes who worked in it began to leave the city. And by the middle of the 3rd century AD, the largest ancient library fell into disrepair. Later Roman sources no longer mention her. The books were distributed to other libraries, and the unsorted ones were either destroyed or simply decayed. 3. Moscow was founded by Yuri Dolgoruki. The age of the capital of Russia is counted from 1147. This date was taken from the Epitaph Chronicle. It describes how the Prince of Rostov-Suzdal, at that time, Yuri, the son of Vladimir Monomakh, invites another Prince Sviatoslav to a feast. "Come to me, brother, to Moscow." This is the first mention of the word Moscow in surviving historical sources. But scientists doubt whether 1147 can be considered the date of the appearance of the city, and Yuri Dolgoruki, its founder. Firstly, the chronicler does not specify where exactly Yuri invited Sviatoslav, to a city, a village, or just a camp on the riverbank. The nameless author does not say anything about where Moscow came from and whether the prince was involved in this. Secondly, according to another chronicle, Tverskoy Dolgoruki founded a fortress on the site of the present Moscow Kremlin only in 1156. However, at that time the prince was already ruling in Kiev and could hardly be in such remote lands. Therefore, some historians believe that the fortification in the region of the Niglanaya and Yauza rivers was built by Andrei Bogolyubsky, the son of Yuri Dolgoruki, perhaps at the behest of his father. Other scientists are inclined to believe that Yuri did it, but in 1153, when the prince was actively building up the Vladimir Suzdal land with fortifications. Thus, only the chronicles give us 3 possible dates, 1147, 1153, and 1156, for the appearance of Moscow and 2 potential founders, Yuri Dolgoruki and Andrei Bogolyubsky. But if we turn to archaeological sources, the matter becomes even more complicated. So, on the territory of the Danilovsky Monastery and near Red Square, buildings and decorations of the 9th to 11th centuries were found. Also, ancient Arabic coins of the 9th century were found in the capital. Therefore, Moscow may be 200 to 300 years older. However, there is one thing: it is not clear whether they found settlements can be considered a city because only a prince could assign such a status. And to completely get confused, one can turn to 2 literary works of the 17th century, The Tale of the Conception of Moscow and the Krutici Episcopacy, and the story on the beginning of the regal city of Moscow. The first relates the appearance of the Third Rome to 1212, and the second as far as 880, and even announces Prince Oleg as the founder. However, historians do not take these sources very seriously. 4. Ivan the Terrible killed his son. Ivan IV the Terrible was not an easy person, at least by modern standards. He executed thousands of people and sent his wives to the monastery. At the same time, he sent lists of the killed and tortured to churches so that they would pray for their repose and repented of their sins. And he, like Peter the Great, had a difficult relationship with the heir. The Tsar believed that the chosen one of his son was dressing inappropriately, and he also saw in him a danger to his reign. Ivan Ivanovich was popular among the people.
According to rumors, on the night of November 16, 1581, Ivan the Terrible, during another quarrel, became so inflamed that he hit his offspring with a rod on the head.
For example, the Pope's diplomat Antonio Passavino wrote about this. The consequences of a family conflict can be seen in the famous painting by artist Ilya Repin. However, it is not known for certain what exactly happened that night. Ivan the Terrible himself wrote in letters that the Tsarevich had fallen sick, that is, he had fallen ill. Chronicles mostly simply reported on the death of the heir to the throne. Whether this was a consequence of his father's blow or not, historians do not know. When the grave was opened, Ivan Ivanovich's skull crumbled. But it is known for sure that Ivan the Terrible fought for the life of his son and called doctors to him. But the treatment did not help, and the 27-year-old prince died 11 days later. 5. Ivan Suzanin led the Polish invaders into the winter forest. Everyone knows the story of Ivan Suzanin. It was in 1613. The terrible dark time was coming to the end. The Boyar Duma chose a new ruler of the Russian state, on whose lands robber gangs and foreign invaders were operating. In this situation, a simple Kostroma serf Ivan did not give the Poles the whereabouts of the future Russian Tsar Mikhail Romanov. He was hiding somewhere nearby. Suzanin led the invaders into impenetrable forests to certain death, and there he died at the hands of the interventionists. But historians have big doubts that everything really was like that. Firstly, it is not a fact that Ivan Suzanin led the Poles into the forest. The fact is that we know almost less about the savior of the first Romanov than about Homer. The only document of that era in which the name of the hero was preserved is a letter of commendation issued by the Tsar to Suzanin's son-in-law Bogdan Sabanin in 1619. In it, the monarch granted Suzanin's relatives, the daughter and her husband, the right to own land, half the village in which they lived, and exemption from serf taxes for the exploits of the father and father-in-law. Suzanin, according to the document, was tortured, trying to find out the location of the applicant for the Russian throne, but in vain. At the same time, there is not a word about the fact that the peasant led the Polish detachment into the dense forests in the letter. A more detailed description of this incident appeared only in a decree of 1731, confirming the right of Suzanin's descendants to privileges. It just talks about Suzanin's sabotage. Where did this add-on come from? Perhaps from retellings of eyewitness accounts that were not recorded in the wake of events. And perhaps from the rumors and tales of the Kostroma people. Researchers have been arguing about this since the 19th century. Secondly, the vagueness of the information available has led some historians, such as Nikolai Kostomarov, to doubt that the feat was accomplished at all. So, Kostomarov wrote that, most likely, Bogdan Sabanin invented a story about his father-in-law to receive royal gratitude. This is indirectly confirmed by the fact that Bogdan was awarded the letter after he addressed a petition to the monarch. And another famous Russian historian, Sergei Solovyov, as Kostomarov points out in his essay, wrote that in 1613 there were no Poles and Lithuanians in the vicinity of Kostroma. And Suzanin may have been tortured and killed by Cossacks or robbers. In general, the story of the feat of Ivan Suzanin came out to match the time vague. Top 20 historical facts I had to double-check to believe. There are a lot of interesting, intriguing, and simply incredible events in our history that you most likely have not heard about. And among them, there are a huge number of confirmed real historical facts that sound like some kind of joke or fiction because of their surrealism. In this video, Top F will tell you about 20 real historical facts that are very hard to believe. And before we start, please support my channel with your likes and subscription and turn on notifications to catch all the new releases. Grab your popcorn, we start. 1. Gaius Julius Caesar Octavian Augustus was the richest man in all of history. The net worth of the Roman emperor, great-nephew, and heir of Gaius Julius Caesar is estimated by today's standards at $4.6 trillion. Some say that the richest man in the world was King Mansa Musa of Timbuktu, as his fortune was too great to be counted. However, the stunning wealth of Augustus could still be estimated. 2. Alexander the Great was buried alive by accident. When Alexander the Great died at 32, he had already conquered and created the largest empire the world had ever seen. It stretched from the Balkans to Pakistan. In 323 BC, Alexander the Great fell ill and, after 12 days of excruciating pain, seemed to have died. However, his body showed no signs of decomposition for a full 6 days. Modern scholars believe that Alexander the Great suffered from a neurological disorder known as Guillain-Barré syndrome. They believe that when he didn't die, he was just paralyzed and conscious. He was buried alive. 3. The most successful pirate in history was a woman. Her name was Zheng Yi, and she was a Chinese prostitute. That was until the commander of the Red Banner Fleet ransomed her and married her. But instead of seeing her as just a wife, he considered her his equal, so she began to command the pirates of the fleet. Zheng Yi soon earned respect and authority among the pirates. And so much so that after the death of her husband, she became the commander of the fleet. Under the command of Zheng Yi, the Red Banner Fleet numbered over 300 warships, with the possibility of adding another 1,200 if needed. Under her leadership were 40,000 to 80,000 men, women, and children. They hunted by robbery in the waters of the Chinese coast. The Red Banner Fleet was such a fearsome band of raiders that the Chinese government ended up pardoning Zheng Yi and her entire fleet, only to let them escape to the open sea. 4. Inconvenient fact about the Lewis and Clark Expedition. The Lewis and Clark Expedition is one of the most famous chapters in American history. It was the first overland expedition across the United States from St. Louis to the Pacific coast and back. It is not surprising that historians and researchers have sought to reproduce its details. However, this was difficult to do, since the expedition lasted 28 months and passed through 600 different places. Archaeologists have found a unique way to identify several events that happened at that time through the analysis of toilets. It was found that the waste products abounded in mercury. Surviving records revealed that the researchers had abundant supplies of Dr. Rush's bile pill, a very strong laxative. One tablet contained 10 grains of calomel, also known as mercuric chloride. These mercury-coated pills were also helpful for another common travel ailment, syphilis. Most of the 30 people on the expedition had venereal diseases. 5. The Colosseum was originally completely lined with marble. If you visit the Colosseum today, you will notice that the stone facade appears to be dimpled all over. While it can be assumed that this is simply the erosion of the material due to its age, it is actually because it was originally almost completely lined with marble. The reason for the appearance of these gaps is that after the fall of Rome, the city was marauded and plundered by the Goths. Yes, get ready. They stripped all the marble from the Colosseum and stripped it, mostly, to bare stone. The holes in the stone are the places from which the iron clamps and poles were torn out, attaching the marble facing to it. 6. Jeanne d'Arc brought the bob haircut into fashion. Joan of Arc, the heroine of France, has become a style icon for the hairdresser Alexander de Paris, who was a real inventor and history buff. He chose Jeanne as a symbol of a female wrestler and was inspired by her cropped short hair, inventing a bob haircut universal for any type of face, easy to style, and incredibly comfortable. And then, based on it, he created the image of Cleopatra for Elizabeth Taylor. The motto of Alexander de Paris was, "Never disappoint a woman." It was he who invented the crab hairpin, a wide elastic band sheathed with fabric, and personally took care of the beauty of the hair of Grace Kelly, Maria Callas, Audrey Hepburn, Elizabeth Taylor, Greta Garbo, and Sophia Loren. 7. The Vikings were the first to discover America. 5 centuries before Christopher Columbus discovered America, the Scandinavian navigator Leif Erikson from Greenland landed on the island of Newfoundland. Under the leadership of Leif Erikson, the Vikings settled Newfoundland and also discovered and settled the Labrador Peninsula, located in what is now Canada. 8. Destroyed Etude of Leonardo da Vinci. Given that Leonardo da Vinci is one of the most influential artists of all time, any of his work is considered priceless. One has only to imagine the excitement in the 1990s when a previously unknown essay by a Renaissance master found among the drawings of Count Stefano della Bella of the 17th century was discovered. The sketch represented Orpheus being attacked by the Furies. Extra care had to be taken to preserve the sketch, so a team of restorers was called into. They destroyed a priceless sketch by treating it with alcohol and water, causing the ink to disappear. 9. During World War I, the French built a fake Paris. Fake Paris with replicas of the Champs-Élysées and the Gare du Nord was built by the French at the end of World War I to confuse German bomber and fighter pilots flying over French skies. They even built a fake railroad that was illuminated in certain places to give the illusion of a train moving on the rails from above. 10. Benjamin Franklin tried to seduce a friend's wife. Benjamin Franklin did many strange things in his life. While he lived in London, he tried to seduce the wife of a friend named James Ralph, which Franklin admitted in his autobiography. According to him, Ralph and his new bride did not have enough money to start a family. So Ralph left London to teach at a country school in Berkshire and left his wife in the care of Franklin. During this time, Ralph often wrote to Franklin, sending him fragments of an epic poem he was working on and asking for his comments. This annoyed Franklin, who disliked the teacher's artistic ambitions, but responded nonetheless. As a result, Franklin fell in love with the wife of a friend and, having abandoned any religious restraint, tried to know her. Mrs. T did not reciprocate his feelings and told her husband when he returned. Thus ended their friendship. Franklin subsequently stated that this was only to his advantage, since no one else sent him poems. 11. Fox throwing was once a popular sport. Fox throwing was popular among the European aristocracy of the 17th and 18th centuries, is when one person, or a couple, must throw the fox as far and as high as they can. 12. Thomas Edison did not invent most of the patented inventions. It's fair to say that American inventor and entrepreneur Thomas Edison was one of the most notorious intellectual property thieves in the world. Of the 1,093 inventions for which he received a patent, almost all he stole from real geniuses such as Nikola Tesla, Wilhelm Röntgen, and Joseph Swan, the last of whom originally invented the light bulb. 13. The Leaning Tower of Pisa was never level. World famous for its slope, this freestanding bell tower was built in the 12th century. When construction began on the second floor, the tower began to tilt due to unstable ground. As construction continued, the slope only increased and subsequently became more iconic than the tower itself. 14. 46 BC lasted 445 days and is the longest year in human history. Called Annus Confusionis, or the Year of Confusion, this year had 2 extra leap months introduced by Julius Caesar. This was done so that his newly formed Julian calendar would coincide with the seasonal year. This calendar is the variant still in use today in most places around the world. 15. 100 million years ago, fast crocodiles lived in the Sahara Desert. At that time, the Sahara Desert was a valley with lush vegetation, full of life, as well as predators. In 2009, fossil hunters discovered the remains of crocodiles. These remains were large supporting legs that allowed the animals to race along the ground at breakneck speed. They could easily grab the hapless dinosaurs in their mouths. 16. The shortest war in history lasted 38 minutes. The war between Great Britain and Zanzibar, known as the Anglo-Zanzibar War, took place on August 27, 1896. It began with the ascension to the throne of the next Sultan of Zanzibar and ended with the victory of the British. 17. Roman Emperor Caligula made one of his favorite horses a senator. If you don't know anything about Caligula, then this is a pretty good way to get an impression of him. He was notorious for his rage and cruelty. Caligula fed criminals to animals and spoke to the moon. He loved his horse, whose name was Incitat, so much that he gave him a marble stall, an ivory manger, a collar with precious stones, and even a house. And Caligula also made his horse a senator and allegedly planned to make him a consul, but, alas, he did not have time, since the Roman emperor was killed. 18. The first ever lottery in history was held during the Han Empire, between 205 and 187 BC. Although it is not known exactly what the prizes were, it is believed that Chinese citizens of that era drew kino for a nominal fee, in the same way that straws are drawn. This lottery was created to help finance major government projects, including the construction of the Great Wall of China. 19. Unpleasant fact about the creator of the telegraph. Samuel Morse is remembered today for his role in the development and commercialization of the telegraph, and for the code of the same name he used to communicate. At the same time, everyone forgot about his unsuccessful political career, built on an anti-Catholic and anti-immigration platform. In 1834, Morse joined the growing nativist movement and began writing a series of articles under the pseudonym Brutus denouncing the Catholic plot to destroy the American way of life. Morse's main targets were poor immigrants from Ireland and Italy who brought with them ignorance and Roman Catholicism. Many of Morse's friends and former followers were shocked by his outspoken views, but he became the leader of the Nativist Party. In fact, they asked him to run for mayor of New York in 1836. As a result, Morse was ranked last among the candidates, but this allowed him to devote his time to working on the telegraph. 20. Violence in Oxford. One of the first scholarly works on the subject of university violence in medieval times was written by Professor Andrew Larson of Marquette University, who studied the history of violence at the University of Oxford. He identified 4 main categories of student violence. The first was personal conflict violence between several people, based on personal problems between them. Although many of these cases resulted in beatings or persecution, they were also the most poorly documented. Urban violence was an altercation between students and townspeople. In such cases, there was often the potential for the most damage and turning into full-blown riots. So it was in 1355 during the celebration of the day of Saint Scholasticus, as a result of which almost 100 people died, including more than 60 scientists. The other 2 categories are north-south violence and house-to-house squabbles. They were usually caused by conflict between nationalities or religions, or they were the result of elections. Although the paper focused on Oxford, these incidents were common at other universities as well. For example, there also was a violent riot in Cambridge in 1381. That's all for today. Mr. Top F was with you. Thanks for watching this video to the end. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Also, write down in the comments what topic of the video you want to see in the next release of Top F. Bye.